Greetings, fellow Mist Wanderers. My name is Steve Morgan, and this is DM of the Mists, covering all things Curse of Strahd and Ravenloft. Now it's time for Hazlan Part 2, concerning Hazlik's Tower, Veneficus, which I turned into a 25-floor Megadungeon. Even if you're not doing Hazlan and you're not doing Ravenloft, this might still be handy for you if you want to just do a Wizard Tower Megadungeon, so hopefully it's useful to people even outside of Ravenloft. All you have to do is change Hazlik's identity and the location of the tower, and you might be able to use most or all of this. Before I get into things too deeply, I just want to give a quick recap of Part 1. So hopefully you saw my Part 1 video, which was everything else in the domain up to the tower. So that was their arrival into the domain, other locations in the domain, what monsters I included, what NPCs I included, and so on and so on. I actually previously visited the tower to meet with Hazlik, which I talk about in that video, but they only made it up to the 4th floor, which was the meeting room. What I'll do is I talked about those in the video, but I will go over every floor again, including the first few they've seen, but then talk about what monsters I added, if there were monsters. Then I'll talk about floor 5 onwards. A quick NPC breakdown. So I have 3 players. One of them is a wizard with a couple of levels of cleric, one of them is a paladin with a couple of levels of warlock, and the other is a rogue. They also have 3 NPC allies with them. One of them is Jennifer Weathermay Foxgrove, who's sort of their fated ally. Similar to the Curse of Strahd Tarokka reading, I did my own. If you want to do something similar, I did a guide on DM's Guild called Second Tarokka Reading. And she's been travelling with them for a while. They also have Brother Dominic, who is a character from an old Ravenloft novel called Tapestry of Dark Souls, who's kind of acting as their priest, a cleric, a healer. They met him in the domain, and he's sort of helping them out, but he's helping them out, but they're helping him out as well. He's trying to locate a dangerous artifact. And thirdly, the whole reason they went to Hazlan was to try and find their old friend and ally, I Ran Hazlan, who's one of the Mist Wanderers described in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. And they found him, and I talk about this in the Part 1 video, and he's joining them in the tower as a sort of extra strong NPC helping them out. He's an archmage with lich spells. Before anyone says, oh my gosh, you got 3 players and 3 NPC allies, I know the common thing is don't have too many NPC allies, but my players like having allies, and they help fill gaps, like they've got an additional healer. I try and streamline them as much as possible, and I've optimized how to play them. I know their stat blocks inside out, so when it is their turns, I'm really quick, and then the PCs have longer, and rounds are quicker, and so on. Ferran also has a pet imp familiar called Skiva, but to simplify things, he had him on the floor below. Whenever they went up a floor, Skiva stayed 1 floor behind. That was 1 less stat block for me to worry about in initiative and things. And the good thing as well is it meant that they had a sort of spy keeping an eye on things. You know, if someone followed up the tower, Skiva could warn them. Another thing to mention as well, which I talked about in the first video, is there are wild magic surges. Yeah, the domain suffers from wild domain surges similar to like a wild magic sorcerer. I played a wild magic sorcerer recently in a campaign. It was a lot of fun. But this is, instead of a 1 in 20 chance, it's a 1 in 10 when anyone except for Hazlik casts a spell. And we had quite a few surges in the tower, especially in the final battle. It was a lot of fun. Before I go on, I want to warn some spoilers. I borrowed a lot of monsters from a lot of different sources. So minor spoilers for the following. Beyond, obviously, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, I borrowed stuff from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, The Witchlight, A While Beyond the Witchlight book, Vecna Eve of Ruin, Candlekeep Mysteries, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, Curse of Strahd, Tomb of Annihilation, The Honor Among Thieves movie, Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I used a couple of magic items. And I've got in my notes minor spoilers for Final Fantasy XII. I don't know how or why, but I've included that. So I'll give that warning just in case. In some of those cases, I know I appreciated it, that was a long list. In some of those cases, it was literally just like 1 or 2 monsters per book. But I do want to warn, because if you're a player and then you encounter the monsters, you're like, oh, I already know about these because of Steve's video. I also use a lot of monsters from Tome of Beasts 1, that's by Corbeau Press. Talked about them in quite a few videos in the past. And I'll try and say sources as I go through, but if I forget any or don't say, presume it's just from the monster manual. The maps I used were from the MAD Cartographer. Great, I say group, I don't think it's one person, I think it's a little team of them. Great map makers, and I used their Endless Wizard Tower map packs. There's 2 of them, so I bought both and basically mixed and matched and used a good chunk of the maps. What I'll do at the end of this video, in addition to the 25 floors I included, I will go through the other floors I didn't include, just so you know what's included. And a big thank you to the MAD Cartographer as well. I asked if it was okay for me to showcase and talk about their maps, and they said yes, so big thank you, big love to those guys. And they also do maps outside of this. They actually do maps of locations in different domains of dread. So they've actually done some Hazlan sublocations, some Valachan locations, which I talked about in my Valachan video, plus other locations in other domains of dread. I actually doubled the size. I think by default they're 15 by 15, but I felt that was a bit small. And I doubled them to 30 by 30 to make the tower a bit bigger, a bit grander, give a bit more space. The only downside, and I think it's quite minor, is it made some of the items comically big. Like there was some of the beds ended up being like 10 feet by 10 feet, but they'd be either for a dwarf or a gnome. I told my players, you know, some of the items might not be to scale, and they understood. And the reason I did 30 by 30 is if you do 20 by 20 or 25 by 25, then the grid won't line up with the squares, the tiles in the tower, but doing it double meant it worked out quite nicely. I'll go floor by floor explaining what monsters and treasure I put in each of them. Try my best to include the right amount that my group could cope with per day based on their level and the experience points of the monsters. I even went as far as looking at an official level 16 adventure. It might have been one of the chapters from Vecnary of Ruin, making a note of what monsters they included, tallying up their experience, working out that it was literally sort of like the amount that a group can fight in a day at their level, and tried to mimic it. But I did throw in a few extra, just in case they didn't trigger them all, which they didn't. So there's some monsters they didn't find or fight. And of course, I think the final battle complicates that even further. But as I'll talk about later, when I talk about the final battle, they used pretty much all their spell slots and their healing and stuff, so it worked out really well in the end. The tower was like a battle of attrition. People say this about Castle Ravenloft in Barovia and Curse of Strahd. The tower itself was a battle of attrition, and they were arriving into the Hazlik battle weakened, not at full resources. Flavour-wise, I said that all the walls on most of the floors were decorated with eyes of Hazlik, so Hazlik could keep an eye on them, no pun intended, but pretty much all the time. And I'll also try and include and share some Reddit resources in the video's description, because people helped me with various things on the Ravenloft subreddit. I think one of them was me asking for lair action recommendations, and I got a few people suggesting some things. I'm pretty sure I used one of them as well, which I'll talk about later. So a big thank you to the Ravenloft subreddit, and I'll try and credit, when there's something that wasn't my idea, and it was an idea someone gave to me, I'll try and remember to, if I don't mention it during the video, I'll try and include a link in the description. Before I start talking about the floors, let's talk about tower defenses. So what I didn't want them doing is climbing or going straight to the top of the tower. They could have done, and they did consider it. What I actually did was I reused the lightning sheath from Van Richten's tower in Curse of Strahd. So even though my players played Curse of Strahd and they found the tower, they never triggered the lightning. So it would have been new to them. So if they touched a wall of the tower from the outside, they get like hit by lightning, basically, or like a lightning damage effect. I was also going to add lots of animated breaths. These are from Fizban's Treasury Dragons, the lightning form variant, and like first one or two would attack, then more, to give them the suggestion that, yeah, they probably shouldn't be going up the tower or flying up or staying outside for too long. Ferran warned them about it as well. He said he spent some time with some of the Hazlik minor apprentices, and that he was told that the tower has some crazy defenses. And the whole point of that was for sort of me subtly as a DM to say, don't go to the top and go down, work your way through the ground floor and go up, which is what they did in the end. One idea I had, which could be useful to you if you find yourself in the situation where they do go to the top and work their way down, was just move Hazlik's floor to be on a different floor. So I had it on floor 22 out of 25, I think, or maybe even 23. But if, say, they went to the top, conveniently, Hazlik's floor is now, you know, in the middle of the tower somewhere or near the bottom. That kind of thing. It's a really cheeky thing to do, but the players will never know, unless they watch this and find it out. In my case, I couldn't do that because they cast Locate Creature on him, and I forgot that he could have had something like Mind Blank on him, which would have disabled it. So I said he's near the top of the tower, but they still considered going from the bottom up. But that's something you could do if you find yourself in a situation where you don't use Locate Creature, Locate Person, and try and go to the top and work their way down. Random encounters, I had it that there's a chance that they bump into people going up or down the floors outside of what was on the floors while they were exploring. But I didn't want it to be too big a thing that happened too frequently, so it was only just a minor thing and a small number of monsters. I had it that every 15 minutes they rested or stayed on a floor. There was a d20 roll. If it was a 16 or higher, an encounter would happen, or if 18 or higher if they were hidden. So if they're hidden like a room, say to rest, and then they rolled a 16, 17, they might hear the footsteps of the random encounter, but they go past or something like that. But if it's an 18 or higher, they actually find them where they're hiding. Unless they did stealth rolls, that would have complicated things further, but yeah, that was the kind of thing I was going for. And then if a random encounter is triggered, I roll a d4. On a 1 or 2, they come from below, and on a 3 or 4, they come from above. The monsters I was considering using were combinations of Monolith Footmen and Monolith Champions. These are from Tome of Beasts. And then what I do as well is roll a d12 to determine, what sort of combination of monsters there were. So, and the lower the number on the d12, the more likely to be a worse encounter in terms of stronger variants, more monsters, and so on. But they never actually triggered any in the end. They did take one short rest, but it was a short rest, as I'll explain later. It was like a magical short rest. But they didn't trigger any anyway. I did have plans for Ruzello to potentially join them as well after they found Ruzello halfway up the tower, which I'll talk about later. Ruzello is one of the 3 main apprentices of Hazlik, explained in Van Richten's guide. So it could have been of the Monolith Footmen and Ruzello to complicate things even more. When they approached the tower, there was a stained glass door. And for flavour, it showed the PCs. I said you see a wizard, a paladin, and rogue, matching your descriptions, being destroyed by Hazlik. Hazlik casting like a destructive spell, which my players love that flavour. They're like, ooh, that's weird, and a bit foreboding, that kind of thing. And when they previously visited, they saw 2 glasswork golems, which are from the Witchlight book, as sort of the guardians, as the sort of the doormen, if you will. And when they got really close to the stained glass door, they shifted to the sides and assembled as people, and it was the 2 glass golems, and then they attacked and had a quick battle. While I go over each of the floors individually, I'm looking at some notes over here. Hopefully with respect to the video, it looks like I'm looking at the map while I'm talking about it, but just a heads up in case I'm looking more over there. Notorious for remembering to look at the camera, sorry about that. So the ground floor was essentially what I called the ground floor cavern. It's the only map in both map packs where there's an opening to the side. So I used it as a ground floor. It's probably meant to be a higher up floor and the monster flies in and out, but I liked it as the doorway, and I added like some tokens that looked like steps leading down, so it didn't just look like to just kind of make it be obvious that it was the stairway leading in. If you didn't want to use this as your ground floor, you could just maybe theatre the mind and say the first floor is literally just some stairs you go up, and then you emerge on the first floor, which is whichever map you want to use. I said the stairs going down were blocked, and the chest in the middle was a mimic, but they didn't activate it. Floor 2, Apprentices' Quarters. So when Hazlik does have people visit, he's got some bedrooms there that they can use. Waiting in the sort of common room area was a dragon-blessed mage. This is from Fisman's Treasury of Dragons. And a pseudo-dragon familiar, who I talked about in the previous video. They were some of the apprentices who were with Ferran. She was trying to calm everyone down and trying to heal people and didn't want to get into a fight when there was a big fight between the PCs and Ferran versus a whole bunch of mages. And she actually offers healing and revivify if needed. The wizard PC has Dimension Door, so the idea being that he could quickly Dimension Door down to the floor and she could cast Revivify. Or Revivify, I always pronounce it wrong. And they didn't explore this floor initially, but they did so on the way down. And I included, I think one of them got like a natural 20 on investigations, so they found a couple of like magic items, like one tucked under a bed, one left behind, that kind of thing. Floor 3, the lecture hall. The chandelier in the middle of the room is a whirling chandelier from Vecna Eve of Ruin, but they avoided it. I said it would only trigger if they walked directly under it, but they kind of walked around. However, they heard a noise from the room to the west. The person in there rolled a really low stealth, and this was Ylvi hiding. So if you saw my part 1 video, Ylvi was a Loxodon who was kind of their guide, travelling around with them, and they didn't know it was actually Vilnius. For those of you who know Curse of Strahd, Vilnius is an NPC in the Amber Temple in Barovia, who took a dark gift, the reincarnation one, got killed by Hazlik, and then reincarnated into a Loxodon and escaped. This was actually when they finally found out it was Vilnius, and they were annoyed because they hated Vilnius's guts. They found Vilnius obnoxious and rude and ungrateful for his help. They saved his life, essentially, and he didn't even thank them. And the giveaway, I think, was Ferran was saying something like, this guy seems really familiar. And Ferran had been in the Amber Temple and met Vilnius, and that's when I think everything clicked. And they decided to drag him along to help so that they had an additional NPC ally, although temporarily, and because they didn't quite trust him, because he basically was with the group, pretended to disappear, and was hiding out here. And the reason he was hiding out was he was basically waiting for the PCs to kill Hazlik, and then he was going to swoop in and be the new leader of Hazlan. Floor 4, the meeting room, quote marks. This is an empty room. It's probably intended by the MAD Cartographer as a sort of populate it yourself with walls and furniture kind of thing. But I like the idea that Hazlik has a distraction-free meeting room. So it's literally just an empty floor, not even got chairs and tables in it, so that if he meets with people, they can just stand up and quickly chat. And the door up to floor 5 was locked, which they opened with a knock spell, and everything else above the floor was new to them. Floor 5, I just call this more miscellany. It's a bunch of random rooms. There's a secret door to a corridor that leads to the next staircase, so they had to try and find and figure that out. I think the giveaway was there's a telescope that's not at the edge of the map, and they thought that's a bit weird, as in the edge of the tower. And there's a fire brazier in the middle of the tower, and I put a fire elemental myrmidon in there. That's from Megadungeon's Tomb of Foes, Monsters of the Multiverse. Floor 6, I called this the Tincture Lab. No monsters here, and I explained, I think Jennifer, she's got some herbalist skills thanks to her time in the herbalist store in Van Richten's shop in Mordant. And she was looking at some things and saying, okay, this looks like some sort of tincture for, keeping yourself awake for long periods, which I think it says in the lore for him, for Hazlik in Van Richten's guide, that he tries to do stuff to stave off sleep, or the need for sleep. Oh, and I also, if they found some random notes lying around, so some of these maps have like pictures of little books and notes and stuff. I had a spreadsheet which I called my Hazlikisms, and they were literally just like random nonsensical scribblings from Hazlik, usually relating to magic or spell components. It would just say like 50 pieces of clay with no context, and one of them was something like, note to self, remind me of the thing I need reminding about. Just silly little things around that they found, and once they read one or two, then they're like, yeah, this is nonsense. Floor 7, the Magic Item Crafting Forge. So this is when they finally encountered some proper action. There was a possessed druid guy, I think that's how it's pronounced, Zaron. That's from, I didn't make a note, it's definitely from Monsters of the Multiverse, and maybe some text will appear here to say what the other source is, which I'll add when I'm editing. I named him Dolmir Ironbreath. It's at this point, I should say as well, I missed a piece of lore in Van Richten's guide. I only saw it when I reread it recently, that Hazlik likes to be in the tower alone with constructs and like nobody else. Whoops. In addition to sometimes allowing apprentices to stay, he had 2 members of staff, if you will. Dolmir, who kind of creates constructs and magic items for him, and Stonky, who I talked about in my previous video, who's his former librarian, who is an NPC from a Candlekeep Mysteries adventure. And I also added here a Tophet, which is from Tome of Beasts, a big construct. And by defeating the Tophet, they broke the curse on Dolmir, who initially was attacking them. Dolmir comes to his senses and provides some lore and info about some of the upcoming floors. Hazlik possessed him. I didn't work out the ins and outs of how, but it probably would have been like the Gaius spell. Because he wanted to quit, and Hazlik didn't want him quitting. Hazlik wanted him to make the Tophet, and then the Tophet could have made more constructs, and those constructs could have made more constructs, and so on, so that Dolmir was no longer needed. Floor 8 was a little Bestiary. I always want to say Bestiary, but I think it's pronounced Bestiary. It's sort of a little zoo of trapped monsters. In the different cages, I included an owlbear, a hook horror, 2 dark mantles, an adult Krothic, I think this is from Megadungeon's Tomb of Foes, Monsters of the Multiverse, and a Bastet temple cat from Tome of Beasts, who was named Ebonique, and a random Ramishka. When they entered the centre of the room, all the doors of the cages opened. Roll initiative. The Bastet temple cat actually helped them out as the other monsters attacked not just the PCs and the Bastet temple cat, but each other. So at one point, I think the owlbear and the hook horror were just fighting each other to try and make it seem like these were, wild monsters just, attacking everyone indiscriminately. And once they defeated them, except for the Bastet temple cat, she was talking to them, said she was originally from a domain of dread called Ha-Akia, and she offered them healing as well. Floor 9 was a walk-through aquarium, by which I mean, instead of being like a tunnel and the fish are around you, you're actually in the aquarium. You can breathe. It's all magical, and the fish swim around you, and it feels like you're actually in water. But you can walk as normal, breathe as normal. But I did say that anyone with like a swimming speed could essentially swim through the room, and it would have been like flying. Like their swimming speed becomes a flying speed. And there were 2 water weirds in here that attacked. Floor 10 I called the indoor allotment. They see the dragon blessed again, but she's without her pseudo-dragon familiar. And it seems she's talking to them as if she's only seen them for the first time, and they were immediately suspicious. The first thing was like, how did she get here? Like, surely she would have passed us. They correctly deduced it's an illusion. I think it was Major Image, cast by a Shade Archive Gloomstalker who's hiding, And this is Ruzello, one of the main apprentices of Hazlik, one of the 3 main apprentices. Ilvi panics, identifies him as Ruzello, and runs away. And what he does is he casts fly. He goes down the floor, casts fly on himself, Misty steps through a window, and flies away from the tower. Ruzello attacks, and he can dish out quite a lot of damage in that stat block. And then he used his Misty Escape ability to retreat upstairs, and then cast Arcane Gate to teleport below them, so when they went upstairs to try and follow him, he was gone. I think Arcane Gate might only be in one of the 2 versions of stat block, just a heads up. The idea being that he harries them later on, keeps them on their toes. They know that someone might just attack them at random at some point, which was great for them kind of thinking, oh god, we've got to deal with him at some point as well. Floor 11, a storage room. I put 3 mimics in random places. They only found and triggered 1, and amazingly, despite playing D&D since 2020, I think it was the first time they'd ever fought a mimic. So that was fun. Floor 12, a peaceful spa. This was empty, and it was designed as a short rest area. But that would mean 4 random encounter rolls. And if they're hidden in one of the side rooms, they would only trigger on an 18 or higher. But if they just rested in one of the main area, it would have been a 16 or higher. They decided not to short rest here. Floor 13 was an ice crystal surrounded by runes. And as they made their way around the floor, a frost salamander from Mordenkainen's Tomb of Foes, Monsters of the Multiverse. Monsters of the Multiverse burst from the giant ice crystal and attacked. And I also added a wilderness hazard from the adventure environment section in the Dungeon Master's Guide that was slippery ice. So there were a few times a couple of the NPCs. I said they only had to roll it like once. Once they did it once, they were kind of used to it rather than doing it like every turn. But the 1 or 2 of the PCs and NPCs sort of slipped and fell on their bottoms. Floor 14, a library. This was Slonky's library. Some of the shelves were empty-ish, or there were gaps, which suggests that these are the books that Stonky took away. Talked about this in my part 1 video. And I also added swarms of animated books from Candlekeep Mysteries, but they didn't trigger any. They basically moved through the room as quickly as possible. They spent a lot of time there. They might have all woken up. And there was also a hidden room with Hazlik's spellbook, which contains the spells from the stat block I used from him. And it would have been guarded by a glyph of warding. Floor 15, in my notes I just called this Void. This is a magical sigil with black voidy goo all over the place. If you touch the black voidy goo, you get cold damage. I think it was something like 2d6 per round. It's dispellable with a 9th level dispel magic, or upcast normally, or in between, but that the latter would require the spellcasting modifier thing to see if it would succeed, so it could fail. Fran actually has a 9th level spell slot, and so he still had that free as they were working their way down, and he cast it then and got rid of it all. But before that, there were 3 Void Dragon Wormlings from Tome of Beasts in the Void. Because they were Void dragons, I said that, and I think they're immune to cold damage anyway, the Void didn't hurt them. And I gave them a bonus action where they could teleport within the Void and appear elsewhere in the room, so they could like attack and then move to a different part of the room so they're further away, and then they could like teleport again and attack and do maybe another breath attack or something like that. Floor 16, the music room, floating instruments. So this is like a designated short rest room, but with special rules. A short rest only takes 15 minutes here, not 1 hour. And if you use at least 1 hit die, you get an extra 1d12 HP. It's very similar to a Bard's Song of Rest ability. Although, hilariously, I rolled the d12 and got a 1, so they got 1 extra HP. And I rolled a random encounter here because they spent 15 minutes here but didn't get one. Floor 17, the trophy room. There was a small purple worm statue in the centre, but that was just a statue. However, the statues to the south of a unicorn, a displacer beast, and a winter wolf came to life. The unicorn actually helped them, fighting the other 2, and similar to the zoo room, the other 2 attacked indiscriminately, so they attacked each other, they attacked the unicorn as well as the PCs. And the unicorn offered them healing afterwards as well as a sort of thank you for releasing me type thing, and said that she was from the Feywild and would return there afterwards. Now, the issue with maps like these, they're amazing, they're full of detail, but when you have a floor that's got, cases containing different items, I feel obliged to say that those are actually items. It's a bit disappointing to the players, oh yeah, those aren't actually there. So there's various cases. There's one case to the east especially that had tons of stuff in it, and I kind of corresponded what they were with what they look like in, if there's art for an item in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I said that there were diamonds, a gold ingot, a necklace or 2, one looked like a helm, one looked like a sword, one looked like a dagger, and so on and so on. But the problem is kind of like, hey, you've just found all these magic items now. Great. I won't share what they all were, what I used, but I have got them in my notes. If people do want to know if it helps, just let me know in the comments and I will copy and paste from my notes. And the cases were locked as well, giving my rogue PC time to shine with some thieves' tools. Floor 18 I called the Gladiator room. If you walk into the middle, a sigil appears, which is an alternative version that they made, and an Erinias appears. I think that's how it's pronounced. But my guys just walked around the edge and avoided the middle, being like, the middle looks dodgy, we're not going anywhere near the middle. They also noticed a metal grill on the ceiling, which becomes very clear when they go to the next floor. The next floor, prison cells. All of them were empty except for one that just had a skeleton in it. Not like a monster skeleton, just a non-animated skeleton. And there was a metal grill in the centre of the room, the idea being the prisoners are dropped down to the previous floor and the Erinias kills them. Grim. Floor 20, Labyrinth. The map shows 3 Minotaur statues here, so I had them be Minotaur living crystal statues, which are from Ghost of Saltmarsh. Floor 21 I called the password room. It looks like a giant Ouija board. Is that how that's pronounced? Ouija board? I had it be, instead of a Ouija board, I had it be a password to the next floor when the door was locked. The password? In Veneficus, as Hazlik's Red Wizard of Thay lover as per the law in Van Richten's guide. If they activate one letter of his name, it lights up. If they go on one of the wrong letters or the numbers, 2 Grey's ooze drop down from the ceiling per letter. So if they say walked across like 5 wrong incorrect letters, you'd have like 10 drop down. So it could trigger a lot of monsters. And if they go on the no, they trigger 3 Osha jellies. No, it wasn't if they go on the no, it was if they went on the goodbye at the bottom. So yeah, and the 3 Osha jellies could drop down as well. But the cheeky monkeys, they avoided the whole area, they skirted around the edge and cast knock on the door to go up, bypassing the whole room and all those oozes. Floor 22, I called this the vault room, but there are other rooms as well. There's 3 what look like paintings on the edges. I had these be paintings of Hazlik, and they were art of Hazlik from different editions, so that was quite fun showing the players, oh, these are what the portraits look like, and it was like art of what he looked like in 2nd and 3rd edition. But I had the paintings be Guardian portraits from Curse of Strahd. To the east, there's like what looks like a giant construct, and I had this be the mighty servant of leuk-o, if that's how it's pronounced, from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, held in place with an imprisonment spell that would be released under certain conditions, which I'll talk about later. To the west, there's 2 doors that look like bank vaults. They could be opened with things like knock or a really high sleight of hand roll. And the inner one, the 2 green lights had tiny glyphs of warding on them, which if they cast knock in the central one, the 2 lots of the lightning would be hit, but only inside that room, and they were all stood and cast knock from outside the room. Boo. The safe, I had it in my notes, I've misplaced my notes for this now, but I had it that the safe was protected by the forbiddance and password spells. And the sigil to the north, sort of blue magical sigil, the idea is Hazlik, if he needs something from the safe, he walks on that sigil, says the password, which again is in Veneficus, and it teleports him inside, and then he can open the doors easily, going from inside to out, so no need to unlock the doors. The internal chamber contained 900 platinum pieces, that's the equivalent of 9,000 gold, a few magic items, one of which included the iron flask that Dom, their NPC ally, had been looking for. And at the base of the stairs leading up, 2 Moonlight Guardians were waiting. These are from Vecna Eve of Ruin. And this is good to the players that Hazlik is close, because when they met Hazlik previously, these 2 Moonlight Guardians were with him. So it's as if they're kind of defending the floor below. Floor 23, I called this room the Apparatus room. So for those of you who are Ravenloft fans, you'll probably be familiar with a really important artifact in Ravenloft lore called the Apparatus. This was only part of it. So the Apparatus, I think, has got like big containers, and you're supposed to insert 1, maybe even 2 rods into it. Hazlik managed to get hold of it, but didn't realize it was incomplete. So he's got plans to use it, but those plans go very badly, as I'll talk about later. But he's using it to try and escape Hazlan and escape the Domains of Dread, which is what I think people like Aslan Rex and Darken have tried to do as well. Hazlik is at the control panel, accompanied by his shield guardian, Luzed, who's his familiar, who's disguised as a frog, but is actually a Bullywug bog sage, which I thought was an older stat block, but I think it's one of the new 2024 stat blocks. And I'll talk more about this when I talk about the final battle. Floor 24, 2 to go. Hazlik's quarters. Gaudy decorations and a big bed for Hazlik. Hilariously, one of my players was annoyed that it was unmade and was like, I quickly make the bed for him, even though he was already dead at that point. I had various magic items corresponding with the random things they could find in the room. Plus there were 3 animated armors and an empty cloak, the latter being from Tome of Beasts, but they'd all lost their power after Hazlik's defeat. My players explored this floor and the top floor after Hazlik had been defeated. There's a chest at the base of the bed that's got a glyph on it and chains and a huge padlock, and there's a demon head opposite. So the glyph of warding would have cast the person trying to open the chest polymorph, and if it was successful would have turned them into a rat. The demon head would have breathed fire, a bit like the Burning Hands spell. And the padlock and chains required a very high Thieves' Tool sleight of hand check. And all that's inside is 1 copper coin and a note that says naughty, naughty. Now I thought my players would hate me for this, but they found it hilarious, the irony, which is what I was going for really. So Hazlik has loads of magic items laying around openly or in much easier to open cases and chests, but this impossible looking to crack chest was basically an opportunity to troll them. And you'll see as well on this map, there's a room in the middle that looks like it's got sigils on it. This is what was going to be what powered the tower. And the idea being that when Hazlik was defeated, it loses magic and all the tower defenses kind of stop happening. Some of the animated enemies throughout the tower lose their power. The sort of lightning and animated breath thing I said on the outside stops as well. And lastly, floor 25 was just a big telescope, no stairs going up. So I used this as the top floor. I think there might be a variant where you can still have stairs going up, so you don't have to necessarily have this as your top floor. And the planets that were whizzing around, as per the art, were 4 Quicksilver Siege Orbs from Tome of Beasts, which my players had fought before, which I talked about in the part 1 video. Okay, next I'm going to talk about the Hazlik battle. This was a 3-phase battle. I won't repeat all the Hazlik info from part 1. It doesn't make sense to sort of repeat that when you can see that for yourself. If you do want to just go to that bit and have a look in the description, there should be time bar stamps and it should tell you the information for Hazlik, what stat block I used, what magic items I gave him, and so on. I will mention that I used the stat block of Sophina. That's from the Thieves Gallery source. These were stat blocks that were made in conjunction with the Honor Among Thieves movie that came out a few years ago. So they made stat blocks of all the main characters and Sophina, who is the villain, who's a Red Wizard of Thay. I used that stat block because I wanted something a bit more powerful than Archmage, which I think is what's suggested in Van Richten's guide. But I gave him magic items as well. Because of the whole lore, it says he can't learn new spells, change his spells, and likes to use magic items in place of that. And I did mention that in the previous video, because I hadn't had them ready by now, but this is when I gave him some lair actions as well. And one of these was from a suggestion from Reddit, so big thank you to the person who suggested this. So a 5-foot wide hole can appear on the floor or the ceiling below or above Hazlik, which he can automatically fall down through or fly up through, instantly reaching the floor below or above. This is similar to, for those of you who know Curse of Strahd, Strahd can face through the walls of Castle Ravenloft, but also the ceiling and the floor. But for Hazlik, it's almost like teleport straight down or straight up a floor. And also the hole makes the sound of a man screaming as it briefly exists, which is the whole tie into the torture that Hazlik gave to Veneficus. And then as soon as Hazlik goes through it, the floor disappears. And then the other lair action I gave was that he can force people to roll. This is once per turn. He can force people other than himself to roll on the wild magic table when they cast a spell. So if they do the D10 roll and succeed, he's like, nope, we're going to consider that a 1. So the final battle had loads of wild magic surges because he did that for a few turns as well. Plus some people rolling 1s anyway. Phase 1 was Hazlik, his Shield Guardian, and Lurzed, who was given a Staff of Frost. This was actually Vilnius's, and they took out Vilnius when he died the first time. And partway through the battle, coming down the stairs, was a zombified human version of Vilnius. I played it that Hazlik killed Vilnius with Finger of Death, but Vilnius had taken the dark gift in the Amber Temple in Barovia that allows you to reincarnate in a new body. So what happened was when he reincarnated into a Loxodon, his new body was fine, but the old body was turned into a zombie as per the info in Finger of Death. So he just had like a little Vilnius zombie attacking them as well. Hazlik cast Death Ward on himself, and this was handy because my Paladin has a Vorpal Sword, so if he did roll a natural 20, it wouldn't have beheaded him outright, it would have just triggered the Death Ward and would have been at least 1 HP left, or just the damage, not the you lose your head thing. And with Lurzed and the Shield Guardian defeated, Hazlik fled downstairs through that lair action I mentioned a minute ago, and then they started to hear heavy footsteps. Phase 2, the mighty servant of leuk-o, who was on the floor below, comes to life and attacks. This thing is basically D&D's version of a mech, and it can be piloted by 2 people who tune to it, and the 2 people were Hazlik and his homunculus, who was already inside it, getting it ready and controlling it. And oh my gosh, you guys, that thing hits hard. It's got a plus 17 to attack rolls. But thanks to one of the people casting Heat Metal, which imposed disadvantage, and astonishingly was rolling really low, trying to attack 2 tanks with high AC. That was the Paladin PC, and Dominic had quite a high AC as well. I think he only really hurt like 1 or 2 people. He missed quite a few times, which was quite frustrating. And for flavour, when he was defeated, I had it that the homunculus fell out of it. There's like a hatch on the back. That the hatch opened, the homunculus fell out, and then the mighty servant fell on the homunculus and squashed it. Blech. However, Hazlik uses Dimension Door to go on the pedestal at the centre of the apparatus, screaming something about, yes, this is it, this is how I leave Hazlan and the Domains of Dread. But then he starts screaming as the lightning, as depicted in the artwork, zaps him and he transforms. Bit of a content warning now for people freaked out by body horror, like weird transforming stuff. I used the Atropal from Tomb of Annihilation, and this is this weird sort of floating freaky thing with umbilical cord of all things that it only speaks Celestial but speaks nonsense, and it was the 3rd phase. Unfortunately, he got defeated pretty quickly and easily because they used a lot of radiant attacks on him, with which he's vulnerable, and he has a very low hit AC. It was still fun though, and I managed to get off one of his legendary actions where he can give 1 level of exhaustion to people, and most people failed to save, so most of the people then were exhausted with 1 level of exhaustion. And with that destroyed, its body disintegrated and disappeared, leaving behind just Hazlik's magic items to claim. And that was it. Hazlik, the Darklord of Hazlan, had been defeated. Oh, and let me see if I can remember all the wild magic stuff that got triggered. So 2 portals appeared, 2 people teleported throughout the room and then covered by ectoplasm. 1 person self-fireballed, 1 person cast grease and then slipped and fell in it, and there might have been 1 or 2 more as well. After the battle, Dom identifies the apparatus, but identifies it as incomplete, explaining what happened to Hazlik and kind of saying to the players, do not use this thing in its current state or at all, because bad things can happen. They went back and sort of checked various floors that they didn't check properly, including the previous floor, the one that had the Mighty Servant on it. They managed to crack open the safe. And the second floor, they were looking for more information about different people. On the bottom floor, as they go to leave, they see a bunch of good NPCs. This is the people they rescued, such as Dolmir, the unicorn, the cat that can talk, and so on. And as they're about to leave, they see Ruzello outside, who's injured, and he says something like, so Hazlik is dead, is he? And they're like, yes. And he's like, well, there's no point in me trying to fight you now. I was doing it to help Hazlik. No hard feelings, eh? And he says he's going to leave the domain. He said, I think I killed your Lockstone friend as he tried retreating, though. Sorry about that. And they go to Ilvi's body a little bit away from the tower, and they see him dead. But before that, they say to Rosallo, did you see him, like, reincarnate into anything? He's like, I don't know. But I did a pre-roll on the table because you can reincarnate multiple times, and he's probably a goblin now. I think I used the critical role version of the table where it's got more races and species. But yeah, he's been reincarnated to a goblin. Will they see him again in the future? I guess we'll see. And then they haven't actually left Hazlan yet, where tonight as I record this, they're going to have another session and they're going to leave the domain. At the moment, they've gone back to the Inn in Toyalis to rest up. They're going to long rest, and then they're going to leave Hazlan for Barovia and return to Barovia for a bit to do some downtime activities. Lastly, my post-Hazlan plans. I might have mentioned this in the other video. Eleni, in a fit of rage, is going to take Gravedrinker with her and attack the carnival the next time they're in the carnival. So an albino purple worm with magic sigils on it will attack, and then Eleni will retreat. But it's going to upset Isolde, because Isolde doesn't want bad things happening to the carnival. They usually have lots of evil fey creatures attack, but then she'll identify that this monster is from Hazlan. The PCs have just been to Hazlan, and so she's going to be like, this is your fault. This attack happened because of you guys. So that's going to make things tense. And I'm thinking of having Jarl the Skygazer take over as the Darklord from Hazlik. And I had it in mind that he would be a Star Spawn, one of the Star Spawn stat blocks. And I really like the idea if he has this Star Spawn army. That's what the meteors were that fall in Moonstone Valley every month. And then maybe the final battle, if they do go back to Hazlan in the future, is against a lesser and greater Star Spawn emissary, which is from Van Richten's Guide. So if they go back to Hazlan, or they hear about it from some NPCs, they might have to go back and then deal with him as well. I also wanted to cover off some of the MAD Cartographer Endless Wizard Tower maps that I didn't use, just so you've got a full flavour of everything it offers. These I didn't want to include or didn't think they would work well, but might be useful for whatever you want to do. There might also be more. I'm pretty sure this is the rest of them, but there might be some variants I don't show, but these are just the ones I had to save by. And I got a feeling I downloaded everything, then separated them into folders of what I did and didn't use. And these are the ones I didn't use. But there's this one where it looks like a laboratory. Could work really well for something like Victor Mordenheim in Lamordia, perhaps. There's one that looks almost like Jurassic Park style, with a bunch of eggs being incubated, like giant eggs. A really freaky child's bedroom with like a really freaky giant doll. A room that looks very demonic with some sort of weird thing in the middle and some blood and a big skull thing and some cages. This reminds me of what I call the trophy room, but with a giant snake statue in the middle. Maybe instead of the frost salamander, I could have been like some sort of giant snake monster, maybe a hydra. There's two versions of this one where there's something kind of just wrapped up as if it's like spider silk. I don't have it now, but I think there's a version where there's a spider included in it as well. There's a version that looks like living quarters with a couple of bedrooms, a lounge area, but there's a big white shining thing in the middle. Do that what you will. This one looked like it had some, maybe for like chickens or some farm animals in the middle, plus some little like huts where you can include some more things in them that kind of go outside the tower. Some like crystal thing. I don't know if this would be like a greenhouse or something of that nature. A big plant monster that reminds me of Little Shop of Horrors, I think it's called. Feed me, Seymour. And I think that's it. I think there might be some others that I might have missed. Looking back, I enjoyed running it. I enjoyed getting all the maps ready. I wonder if 25 floors is too many. And in theory and on paper, 25 floors, bear in mind some stuff didn't really have anything on them. There were no monsters on some of them. Doesn't sound like it's a lot, but I don't know. I do feel like maybe I should have done 15 or 20 instead. So that might be something you want to consider if you do something similar. I do think 25 might have been too many. I also think I gave out too many magic items, but I couldn't help myself with the fact that they go on this floor, they see these cases full of weapons. Those are weapons I'm going to give them. I'm not going to say, no, those aren't weapons or they're fake or replicas or whatever. But that's on me for making those floors available. That could be another thing to consider as well. If you say, for example, if you're running like a very magic item light campaign, maybe don't include any of the maps that look like they have magic items lying around. What do you think? I'd love to know your thoughts. Other than obviously homebrewing D&D and making up a lot of stuff, which I've talked about in my other videos, I've never really done a big adventure like this, or like something you could almost treat like a one-shot or a two-shot, where it's just like all these floors with all these monsters on. So I'd love people's feedback. What would you do differently? I'm very tempted to make this a DM's Guild adventure, as in like put it in a PDF and make it available in DM's Guild. I have to see about the logistics of working with people like MAD Cartographer and Kobold Press with some of the maps and the monsters I used, but maybe use my own maps or make my own with Dungeon Draft, or I don't know, use different monster suggestions, especially for people who haven't got Tome of Beasts. We'll see how it goes. And that's it for this one. Thanks for watching. Hope it was useful. Future Ravenloft videos. There was a Christmas video I wanted to do, but was ill, and then I wanted to do this one as soon as Hazlan was finished. It's a little bit silly and lighthearted. That might be the next video. And then there might be more Domains of Dread in the future, as and when my players visit them. And we'll leave it there. Thank you, Miss Wanderers.